What is going on, FPL managers? Welcome to a new video from Fantasy Football Scout. It's the Game Week 2 deadline, 30 minutes beforehand. Well, maybe like slightly less now, 29 minutes. Here we go. And I'm joined by my guests, Seb and Zophar. How are you guys?
Good that I didn't know who was going to go first then. I'm really good, thank you very much. I will jump straight in there.
We can all talk together.
Yeah, of course. We'll harmonise. Yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be joined by Zophar, who we just said beforehand. I don't think we've met in virtual, whatever this is now. So an absolute delight. How are you?
Doing fantastic. It's a pleasure to be on here with you guys. I haven't actually interacted with Ted either. It's my first time.
Is it? Seriously?
I think so.
Is it? Oh my goodness.
I think I've been on with Joe a few times, Andy a few times, but not with either of you guys.
That's crazy. Well, you're going to enlighten us with your FPL wisdom today, I think. So
I'll try.
We'll have a look at our teams and we'll have a look at some of the talking points ahead of the Game Week 2 deadline. I think there's a few bits to get through, but mainly focusing on captaincy. Seems to be like a 50-50 split at the moment. Any last-minute transfers for either of you, or are you locked in?
Nothing here.
Locked in. Rolling a transfer.
Nice to hear. I think there would be manic craziness if we were trying to think about it at last minute. I think I'm locked in as well. Shall we move on? Let's talk about... Who wants to go first? I'm going to go Zoff. Shall we look at your team first, mate? Let's go.
Go ahead.
So, for the viewers' benefit, we've got Sanchez, Alexander-Arnold, Shaw, Tsimikas, very, very similar. I think we all have the very, very similar teams, actually, apart from three players. Salah, captain, Fernandez, Greenwood, Rafinha, Ings, Tony, Antonio. So, how are you feeling ahead of Game Week 2's off? That seems like a really decent team to me, with only a couple of, sort of middling fixtures.
Quite excited. I'm waiting to see how Leeds perform in front of their home fans. I watched both their documentaries on Amazon, so I consider myself, they're almost like my second team. They're the team I enjoy watching the most. So that's a game I'm really looking forward to, as well as seeing Lukaku in action.
Seb loves that. Leeds were great last year, weren't they? And they were everyone's sort of sweetheart second team, where they played such a nice attacking style of football. So yeah, completely agree with you. Yeah, it'll be an interesting game, that Leeds versus Everton. I can't really call it. Will Leeds suffer the same fate to Man United, or will I don't know. I can't call it. What do you think about the result of that game?
Seb, why don't you tell us first?
Oh, I see. Throw it over to me. We lost by a lot to go on. Be like, Seb, bring 7 here. It'll be fine.
So bring 7.
I mean, we've seen that match before, I don't think we learned anything new. We lost 6-2 to them last year, and we changed the way we played a bit, and we drew. Man United didn't change. They haven't changed here. When we try and go out and match them like that, especially with a midfield with Rodrigo in, which I don't think works in those matches, unfortunately, then they're just better than us individually. That's what it comes down to. We saw, obviously, no Calvin Phillips, which isn't going to help, but we had Calvin Phillips in the 6-2 when he was subbed at half-time. So I don't know if that was going to fix it. The interesting thing to look at is that Man United did only have an XG of something like 1.6, but obviously it's one match, so that doesn't really tell us anything. It just tells us they were good. Well, we could see that with our eyes. So maybe on another day, it's not quite as big a scoreline, but ultimately we almost beat ourselves. We got dragged out of position. We allowed Scott McTominay to put in that once-a-season performance he does against us, and they created chances at will, to be honest.
Yeah, Rafinha missed that chance at the end, and I was head in hand. I was so wishing that he'd scored that. But yeah, Man United did overperform a little bit, but that's very likely in a one-game situation. So, you can't begrudge him that at all. So Zoff, like Greenwood, you've got him in your team. We neither Seb or I have Greenwood, and I have to admit I'm a little bit fearful because he did look very clinical. Are you happy owning him for the next few weeks?
I think up to the Newcastle fixture, he's going to remain in my team at least, because Cavani is probably going to miss Game Week 4 with the 3-legged friendly matches for the South American guys. And I thought, so you have Southampton, Wolves and Newcastle. On paper, that's a great run of fixtures.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When Cavani comes back in that team, I wonder how it will affect Fernandez, because that team can change. Like Pogba goes back in the pivot. Fernandez maybe doesn't make those attacking runs. I think you were talking on the FPL wire, weren't you, Zoff, that especially LR, he was saying that Greenwood and Martial made sort of wide runs, didn't they? And Fernandez had a lot of space in the middle. So I think that Man United team will change a lot once Sancho comes in, once Cavani comes in. So it'll be interesting to monitor. What do you fancy about? Why have you chosen to captain Salah this week apart over Fernandes? Because I think both of them are good captain picks, right?
Purely the home advantage. I think home fans made a huge difference in game week 1. You could see it in the body language of the players, and Anfield is a place where you would expect the crowd to make the most of a difference if you had to pick one ground in the entire league. Sorry, Seb, probably Leeds too, but I haven't probably experienced that yet. But so I think that really plays a big part for me. It's just the home advantage. Simple
Yeah.
as that.
It's a big one. Seb, what do you think is the fact that obviously Man United had a big victory against Saints last season? Does that mean anything? Does it mean that Fernandes is going to score 3 or 4 goals at Saints? Does it matter?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because they had a big victory, and Southampton have lost in a big fashion in the past as well. But that's 2 data points. If we were to plot that on a graph, we might circle them and ignore them. There's a lot of times Southampton haven't lost by that margin. So yeah, it's clearly possible, but I wonder if it's possible for any team. We just haven't seen it for other teams, through pure chance or luck or whatever. So I don't want to factor that in too much. Of course it's there in my mind, but I'm also on Salah. I just think they're so evenly matched this week ahead of it, before we know what's going to happen, that it might just come down to luck, who comes out the better pick. And I think Salah just edges it for me beforehand. As Zophar is saying, we've got the home fixture. I know his record against Burnley in the past isn't the best. I think he's got, off the top of my head, 1 goal and 2 assists in 8 matches, something like that. But his XGI is just under 1 in all those matches. So again, he's maybe just been unfortunate. And Burnley aren't the same team that we've seen in the past. We think of them as this, really solid defensive unit. Will keep out a striker, keep out Salah. But at the end of last season, they kind of flipped that a bit. They had some good attacking numbers and were letting in a lot of chances. And last week, they conceded quite a few chances to a not all that great Brighton side, if I'm completely honest. So I kind of fancy Salah just. But if you're going Fernandes, don't let me talk you out of it. Stick with it. It's going to come down to luck this week, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that whether Jota or not plays for Liverpool will be a massive factor in Salah's output, I think, because I think Firmino's a better shout as an enabler for Salah. So if Firmino starts, I think Salah's got a really good shout of getting a haul against Burnley. And I think it's the first time Liverpool have a home game with fans in the stadium since they won the title, or even before that. So I think it's going to be a rocking atmosphere, let's just say that. But it's not everything, it's not the be all and end all, and I think both are good picks this year. We were having a discussion before stream started about captaincy in general, weren't we? And saying that what's the best strategy to captain? Is it just to captain the obvious pick? And why? Why is it? Do you want us to kick us off, Zoff?
So what I normally do is I go to the captain poll. And I mentioned this in that masterclass article. And if I see the guy I'm looking for is way top in the captain pool, I just don't overthink it. Because when you bet against somebody else, you're not only betting that Bruno does well, you're sort of betting against Salah as well. That you're betting that, not only is Bruno going to do well, he's going to do better than Salah. So you obviously can't flip it around. And if you go the other way, you're going to make bigger rank gains, etc. But I think the time for that is later on in the season, not early now. Early on, you just try to stay with the pack. And you look for your opportunities later on.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there's a polarization a little bit between the Twitter community, the FPL community that are obsessives, and the casual community who play for fun. And Fernandes always seems to be a more popular pick in the latter. Salah seems to be a more popular pick with the Twitter community. So there's going to be a difference in the effective ownerships. But I mean, for me personally, I've made a promise to myself this year to captain the most obvious pick. And for me, that reduces the volatility. And Seb, we were talking beforehand, before the stream, about, we had 2 different counterpoints, didn't we? Mine was that if you removed captaincy from the game, it would reduce that volatility and the better players would win more often. But what was your counterpoint? I thought that was quite interesting.
So I think in isolation, I think you're probably right. But then from my point of view, I would say the more opportunities we have to make a decision, so whether that's captain, transfers, benching, chips, whatever it is, there is more opportunity for skillful players, knowledgeable players to apply their skills and knowledge and gain an edge over someone who maybe is just phoning it in or just, doesn't really check it every week. If we just all picked a team at the beginning of the season and could do nothing, just had to leave it all year, I know you're saying the variance would be low in terms of the decisions we're making, but also if KDB, for example, got injured in the first week and I've captained him, that's my season over. Whereas obviously the way FPL works, I can react to that, make a decision and hopefully improve my team. So I think with more opportunities to gain higher score, higher rank, the better players should come to the top. But yeah, in isolation, I take your point on the captain.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because how difficult is it to predict a one game week result? And we saw last week, the variance was huge, and that's the difficult one. But I do get your point. If someone's really good at picking captains because they understand the limitations of certain teams and the strengths of others, the matchups between those two teams, then that's something that they have an extra advantage in. So I completely get it. It's an interesting point. I don't think I'm that skillful, so I think I'm just going to go with,
the
massive flaw in our plan here is we need to be skillful to pull this off. So
63%. I just had to look at the captain's poll, 63% towards Salah. So like we're talking about, this is a clear polarization, the 18% for Bruno.
That's interesting. But isn't Bruno's ownership higher than Salah in the general game? And it might...
Really?
I think so.
I know Shaw is top. I think Salah is probably second.
Salah's on 56.7 and Bruno is on 58.3. So
there you go. Just. Right, let's move on and talk about Seb's team. Very, very similar to Zoph's, but the only two players different, Buendia and Wilson, as opposed to Greenwood and Tony. So talk us through, those two players. Why do you rate them more so than the other alternatives, Seb?
I will happily say that right now I wish I had Benrahma rather than Buendia, but obviously because he scored more points, so that's some massive outcome bias there. I think with the fixture this week, Buendia's got Newcastle at home, which is exactly who Benrahma had, although the other way around when he put his big score in. So I'm comfortable giving him one more week, but we'll see. I wasn't that impressed by Villa. They need some time, of course, but we'll see about that one. And then Wilson. I really like Wilson. Like we saw him put up some good numbers last week, score a decent goal. I think it's not Newcastle I want to part of, it's Callum Wilson. If it weren't for the injuries, I think he'd be a Champions League striker, and we can see that in the numbers when he plays. I built my forward line basically based on that idea that at the beginning of the season, when these three injury-prone players are all fit, their mins per XGI are some of the best in the league. Like Antonio is up there with Vardy and Kane. So just pick them when I can, get the points, and then transfer them out later. If they all get injured at once, then I get Lukaku. Good times.
Absolutely. No, I think he's an excellent striker. He's one of the most clinical in the league. I watched that Newcastle match and Sam Maximan stood out for me. It's such an incredible player. Zoff, do you rate Sam Maximan? Is he ever going to grace your FPL team?
I think I really rate him, and he's a lot of fun to watch, but he's also can be very frustrating to own at times. So he's not the kind of player I go for. I prefer my steady eddies rather than these guys who get 16 one game and then 2-2 the next. I'd rather get 5-5-5. That's the way I play.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. It's fair enough. And he's so injury prone as well. But if he stayed fit all whole season, he would be very tempting. I remember we all had him in our Game Week 1 teams last season. That just says it all.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I feel like he's one of those players that, ignoring the fact that I had him last year, that you like him in the team because he's better for your other fantasy assets, like Callum Wilson, rather than necessarily himself. Because we saw last week, he was the heartbeat of that side, but it wasn't necessarily him that was going to get the points because he was more sort of just controlling everyone else around him and trying to create opportunities for other people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's talk about Buendia, because I think we can tie this into the Gundogan conversations, because there was talk in the press conference yesterday that Pep said Gundogan was fit, but I'm not, you have to take that with a pinch of salt whether he's actually going to still play or not. And if you owned Gundogan, would you keep him? Would you sell him? And there's a lot of other mid-price premiums like Buendia. I don't know whether people would transfer in Buendia after his showing against Watford, but I think Newcastle was a great fixture, and I think he's still an excellent option in FPL. But there's also the likes of Rafinha, Barnes, Benrahma, and Sarr to think about. So, what do you guys think? What's if you had to pick one mid-price option to have? Who would you pick? Let's start off with Seb.
Oh no, I had to pick one option. So just while I delay and think on that, I guess Gundogan's price fall to 7.4. If I had him, I maybe would have tried to avoid that, just because early on, we know a 0.1 is almost like a 0.5. But if you've got something on your bench, I wouldn't be too worried. Gundogan's nice for this fixture, but if you could pick any player for this fixture, you wouldn't be picking Gundogan. So it's not like you're missing your captain, your KDB option here or something. No, you desperately therefore need to get a new Man City option. So I'd be tempted to hold on to him. I know Pepper said he's fit, but that doesn't mean he's going to play. We don't know if he starts on the bench, if he'd come off. If you absolutely had to replace him, say you're just not confident in him and you've got no other options on the bench, I'd probably, there's attractive options for this week. With the price fall, you probably can't quite grab Jota or someone like that now, Greenwood. But I'd maybe start looking further ahead and maybe build him into a sort of 2 transfer move. None of us are making a transfer this week, so we've got 2 next week. Maybe you start that now and complete it next week. So maybe even move down to like a Sarr, or maybe not Buendia for me, because I think he needs to go in a couple of weeks. We've seen Smith Rowe be good at Arsenal, but also Odegaard coming in now. So I'd want to look at the rest of the team. And I don't know if there's an option that jumps out, because it depends on the rest of your team. But maybe facilitate a Lukaku, or someone I really like in a few weeks is Mason Mount when Chelsea's fixtures get good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've got 2 groups of mid-price players. We've got the short-term picks that are rotation risks that have, by and large, all done well in the first game week. So we're getting a little bit of bias there. But we've also got the longer-term picks, maybe a little bit sluggish to get out of the starting blocks. So Zoff, who do you reckon? Who would you pick? Ben Rama? Is he someone that you're looking at?
Somebody I've been flirting with all week in terms of bringing him into my team. But the one thing that's really been putting me off is Jesse Lingard. I've researched it, seen all the YouTube videos from like Man United discussions and all that stuff. Man United look at him as a player they don't mind going if they get 20-25 million for a player with 1 year left on the contract. It's a pretty good deal. And the Hammers have to add squad depth. If they don't add any depth to this existing squad, they go to Europa League campaign, they're going to be neither here nor there. They're going to have difficulties in the league as well as in the Europe.
Yeah.
So they absolutely have to recruit, and I don't see anybody who'd fit the bill better than Lingard. They probably don't even have to buy a striker if they buy Lingard, because you could push Bowen up front, push Ben Rama up front. You have to do something like what City do with all those technical players. So that's probably the main reason I'm holding off Ben Rama.
Yeah.
In terms of other players I like Sarr a lot as a long-term pick. I think he could get something against Brighton. He could get something against Spurs, because again, they'll be playing on the counter against Spurs, and he's their main outlet on the counter, and he's a bit set and forget. Now, the problem with Greenwood now, if you bring him in, there's a lot. Now, you see, there's talks about Cavani being already in training, Solskjaer saying he's very fit and all that stuff. You see Martial building up fitness. So Greenwood is somebody you're probably going to have to transfer out again in game week 4. So it depends on how many players like that you're carrying in your team, right?
This is the interesting part, isn't it? We're all going to have fires to fight in the next few weeks, and it's just prioritizing which ones to fight first. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. So I don't think any of us would transfer in riskier players like Jota, for instance, that might have
not Jota, but I was discussing with Late Riser before coming on. He's probably looking at Greenwood, for example, but he says, I'm just looking at the next 3 fixtures, keeping it simple. I look at him as a pick for the next 3. If he gets enough points, I don't mind transferring him out for a hit later on down the line if I have to, but I have confidence on him repaying it over the next 3 matches. Now, just to go back to the Gundogan topic, I really think anybody who has Gundogan now should really stick. If you put him in your team, it probably wasn't in the Spurs match in mind. You have Norwich and then Arsenal, who are probably easier opposition based on what we saw in game week 1 than Norwich. So it's not. So if you have, and the thing is with KDB not playing, I've noticed Gundogan is often a lot more advanced. And from the comments, it sounds like Gundogan is more likely to start than KDB is.
He certainly nailed last season, wasn't he? So I think maybe that longevity in starting is probably...
He's one of the guy Pep definitely trusts. Yeah. And they've come off for like a loss. And I think let's assume that the shoulder injury didn't happen and you had been told that Gundogan is fit and available. Would you transfer him out?
No, I don't think so. As Seb said earlier, if you've got strength in depth on your bench, then I just don't think you worry about it. I think you've got to be patient and see what happens in game week 2 and then react afterwards.
Yeah. Especially we in the price, right? Sorry to interrupt, just to make sure, because we had a few questions in the chat specifically about Gundogan, especially if you've taken the price drop now, there's absolutely no reason to sell him.
Yeah.
I agree. If you were going to do it, you'd want to hold on to that 0.1. Nothing's really changed, so I fully agree with that.
So speaking of transfers, we've all got 2 transfers going into game week 3, but we have the international break coming up. What is your opinion about using 1 transfer next week and keeping 2 for the international break? Because we're going to have plenty of players that are more complicated in the fact that they are going away to red list countries and potentially have to isolate when they come back. So it's something that you're going to use. Are you going to use 2 transfers next week, or are you thinking about being a little bit more prudent? Seb, come to you first, mate.
Personally, kind of boring answer. Wait and see. Like, I have some plans. I've mentioned, especially if Villa aren't all that again, maybe Wendy or and Ings go. But I need to see what happens this weekend. What happens when one of my strikers gets injured, or I don't know, Salah gets sent off or something. So I don't want to lock myself into a certain way of thinking now and then struggle to get out of that. And that includes what you're saying there, maybe trying to hold them for after the international break, or at least one of them. And price changes will come into that as well. Early on, I'm not going to make a move just for the sake of a price change, but I want to keep an eye on them. I want to make sure I preserve value or even build value where I can. So on my chopping block is probably Buendia, but he always was after game week 4. So I might just bring that forward. Otherwise, wait and see for me now.
Yeah, that's a sensible way of looking at it. So Zoff, I presume that you're bringing Lukaku straight into your team.
Nope, unfortunately not. If he bangs a hat trick today, I'm going to be bombarding you with Fantrax trade requests. But let's keep that for a separate conversation. But getting to next week, August 25th is what I checked. They're having the review of the red list countries. There's a talk that Egypt might drop out, certain countries might come back in. So that's going to be before the game week 3 deadline. So one of my main motivations for banking a transfer this week was that by next game week deadline, the players will probably be leaving 2 days right after that, right? I'm not sure, is it a Friday deadline or Saturday next week?
I think it's Saturday still, potentially.
Probably. So, but either way, it'll be like 2-3 days before players depart. So you'll have a clear idea of which players are probably going to have to quarantine, which players are going to opt out, etc. So you might know still which players you might have to get rid of. Like if Salah, for example, is missing game week 4, he has Chelsea in game week 3. You could think about swapping him out for somebody like Lukaku for a couple of games.
Yeah, interesting. The next Friday deadline, just FYI, is game week 5. So we've got Saturday deadlines.
I do quite like, speaking of Salah, I do quite like the Salah to Son move on the horizon. Just try and play that a bit, that premium rotation game.
I was thinking...
could do that anyway.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was thinking the same with Salah to Fernandes for me. I don't know whether it's a bit of a luxury.
You don't have Fernandes, Ted?
No.
Are you aware that he scored a hat-trick last week?
Oh, really?
That's worth a lot of points, that.
I must have missed that. Yeah. Get him in my team straight away. And that's a good segue, Seb. I'm going to move on to my team. Very similar to you guys, but obviously without Fernandes. I've split the funds into Son and Mahrez, and... So Son, Mahrez and Harvey Barnes instead of your Fernandes, Buendia and Wilson, or Fernandes, Greenwood and Tony. So, I mean, I think it's probably a good week to have Son and Mahrez. They've both got favourable fixtures. Obviously, I'll be eating my words if Mahrez is benched by Pep later on. So, I mean, I just wouldn't be surprised. But it's an excellent fixture, Norwich at home. So I have high hopes. So the vice-captain is on Mahrez. I don't currently have the... cojones to captain him. I think what I was saying earlier, just captain the obvious player. So Salah it is, and we'll see what happens. But Barnes was an interesting one. I really hope that he steps it up a little bit. I know Brendan Rodgers was saying that he's lacking a little bit of fitness, but hopefully the next couple of weeks it invigorates him, and hopefully he can get back to his best. But I certainly saw some promising signs in game week 1 and pre-season, so there's no reason to react just yet. But yes, no sudden moves from me. And we were talking about making that little cheeky move away from Salah in game week 3 when he has Chelsea, and potentially misses out game week 4 when he's potentially isolating from being in Egypt. So do you think that move has legs, Salah away to either Son or Fernandes, for anyone thinking about it, or is it a bit of a luxury? Zoff, what do you think?
It depends if we have confirmed news that he misses game week 4. Unless I see that in writing, it's absolutely confirmed, without doubt, set in stone, Salah is going nowhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because we'd have to make that move in game week 3, and there's no guarantee that you'll hear anything before that.
I think we will, because like we were talking about, August 25th, it's a review, and I was reading an article from The Independent. I think they do these data analytic trends, right? They see which direction the terms of the number of cases and stuff is moving, and they're able to predict whether country is going to move to the amber list from the red list. So Egypt is right on top over there. They're expecting Egypt to go into the amber list.
Interesting. And do you think that Salah definitely goes on international break?
I just lost audio. Just a second.
Oh, we'll come back. Seb, you can fill in for him, mate. What do you think about this?
Now I can hear you. Sorry, I can hear you.
Saved. Phew.
We'll come back to you, Zoff. But Seb, what do you think?
On the Salah out move potentially?
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I think there's a marginal gain to be found there. It could definitely backfire, but it's one of those opportunities if you have nothing else to do. maybe Son for a couple of weeks only is a more attractive prospect. If you don't have Fernandes, yeah, maybe there's an option there. But then the only thing with the Fernandes move, and just start thinking out loud, is if I'm doing Son, I'd probably know I was going to move back and I'd be comfortable with that. If I'm doing Fernandes, have I then just created the same but different problem because I have Fernandes but not Salah, and I don't necessarily want to keep swapping those two? I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it. I mean, another player that I want to look at in a few weeks is Kevin De Bruyne. He's a similar price. I know probably overall slightly poorer for fantasy. He's had one season that probably matches their big 200 plus point scores. But given a decent run of fixtures, he could be extremely dangerous. And he's like 3% owned or something.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay. So you mentioned Ings out a while back. Obviously, it depends on how he performs in the next couple because Aston Villa still have really good fixtures. But Calvert-Lewin rose in price last night, which is really annoying. And I know we eyed up a few that transfer, maybe Ings to Calvert-Lewin later on. So if you're just doing it without any money in the bank, that now becomes impossible. Do you like Calvert-Lewin, both of you, for the upcoming games?
Very much. I've got Luka Dean for a similar reason. Their medium-term fixtures up to about game week 11 are great. So you can just leave them, be happy with the returns you're probably going to get over a period of time and focus your energy on your transfers elsewhere. As you say, annoyingly, I might have done Ings to Calvert-Lewin at some point. That's going to be a little bit harder now. But yeah, I've got Dean at least. What about you, Zoph?
I think game week 4, irrespective of how well Ings does over the next two, he's going to go because the fixtures after that turn a little bit. I think you have Chelsea away, then you have Everton, United, Spurs. I'm not sure. Let me just check exactly. Yeah, after Everton, United, Spurs, exactly after Chelsea. So that's really not a very good run. And I think this year you have to hop on, hop off at the right time because there's so many good options.
Absolutely. What do you think about Benitez as a manager? Obviously, we've only had... I'm a little bit biased because I'm a Liverpool fan, but he's come into that Everton team. He's presumably going to instigate his methodical way. And we saw some intent to get the ball to Calvert-Lewin basically at every possible opportunity last week. Do you think that he's going to settle that team down and they're going to start producing more consistent results and that's going to help Calvert-Lewin?
I think so, because I actually rate Rafa Benitez as a manager. Even when he came to Chelsea, he got a lot of stick, but let me get this, like, there's absolutely no doubt about it. He is a world-class manager. He knows what to do with the resources available. And you can see he's got the best out of certain players in the past. He had Salomon Rondon. I remember he used to be very similar in the kind of profile that Calvert-Lewin plays. He just hoofed the ball up to him. So if he can get the best out of Rondon, I think DCL is a much better player.
Rondon is my absolute hero. He was my ever-present in my team where I did really well in FPL, so I love Rondon. And Calvert-Lewin could be, really, really good this year. If he doesn't... the problem with Everton is they lagged in the second half of the season, and I think Benitez has that sophistication to not let that happen, potentially. He has more strings to his bow. I know Ancelotti's an absolutely world-class manager, but I think Benitez is just slightly more... I can't put my finger on it. He's consistent. He will do anything to make sure that team is consistently performing at the same. And obviously Everton suffered with injuries as well, so that's probably the main reason for it. So yeah,
you mentioned the consistency. Interestingly, I kind of agree in terms of I wonder if Rafa's almost a better manager for fantasy terms, not in terms of he'll do better with Everton in football, but we probably know what we're going to get. Maybe a little more defensively solid. They're going to use the wings. They're going to try and find DCL. And I wonder if they might have slightly more predictable results against certain teams, whereas Ancelotti's Everton very much seemed to flip between trying to attack and then dropping all in with like 2 banks of 4, a low block. And we didn't always know when that was going to come. I remember there was a Leicester match where I was quite excited. Both teams were on the up, looking good. And they both kind of just tried to counter each other the entire match. And I think it ended up being 1-1, 2-2, something like that. And that wasn't what I expected. I think Rafa is going to be a lot more predictable in that front.
I agree. There was too many unpredictable results from Everton last season. Leeds beat them, and then I remember tripling up with them ahead against Newcastle, and I can't remember what it was, West Brom or something, and they lost both matches or something. Absolutely ridiculous. So hopefully they bring more consistency this year. But yeah, Calvert-Lewin seems like a good option. Is there any other picks that you guys are lining up for game week 3 that you think are a bit left field, something that might be exciting to make your team different from the template? Zoff?
I'm not really about differentiating from the template much, to be honest. So
Probably
I'm
the
wrong
worst person to start
ask.
with, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was hoping you'd go to 7. I could just be like, oh yeah, that's a great one. I'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with Seb. We'll come back to you, Zoff.
To be fair, I don't know if I've got anything too exciting. A DCL alternative, Jimenez, their fixtures switch at a similar sort of time and look nice. If he's, back to his best, hopefully he's healthy, but also from a footballing point of view. And otherwise, I maybe want to try and get De Bruyne at some point, but I like De Bruyne more than he probably is good, even though he's absolutely world class. So I've always got this thing in my head where I'm like, I need to get KDB in. So we'll see about that. Realistically, I need to make some sacrifices to make that happen.
You mentioned Wolves there and Jimenez. Obviously, that remains to be seen at how well he's dealing with it, but he's obviously world class. But the person that stands out for me in that Wolves match was Traore, and he just blew it all apart. Obviously, he's not as technically good as other players, but he certainly seems like an exciting option if you don't have the funds to stretch to a Jimenez for the game week. Is it game week 4 fixture swing for Wolves?
Yeah, I think it's the exact swing when Villa drop off that Wolves come in. So the only thing about Traore is I was looking at his numbers after that match. So he was the biggest underperformer in terms of XGI from the week. He had like a 0.81 and obviously didn't score, missed that good chance. Looking at him historically, he doesn't put up numbers that are that impressive, but every now and again, and we see it when we're watching him, right? Every now and again, he looks unplayable. I wonder if that was just one of those matches where he has a brilliant day, but because it was the first game week, it's going to stick in our mind. And we maybe need to be careful. If this week and next week he doesn't look like that, we maybe don't want to get too attached to that. So jury out for me very much.
Yeah. We haven't noticed that the deadline's actually passed. It's 11:02. So happy game week 3, everyone. It feels like a happy new year or something like that. We should all celebrate.
Quick, someone kiss them.
Oh, I love that. So yeah, we're all locked in. It's game week 2 time. I'm excited. There was such a lag, wasn't there, since the start of FPL, that we've got that hit of FPL-ness in game week 1, and last week was such a long. It was like a long week, wasn't it, with no football, and we didn't really have any problems to solve. So I'm just so happy that football's back this weekend, and we can sit down and watch all of the football again. So I think we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck for game week 2. I hope you have great game weeks, and we will see you again soon. So it's a bye from me.
Bye from me.
And a bye from me.